April is the busiest time of year for the coastal villagers of the Philippines. It's the beginning of the season when millions of milkfish fry come into shore. The time they arrive can be predicted by the phase of the moon. The villagers work through the night, collecting the fry to supplement the family income. At dawn, other family members take over the gear. The run is at its peak. Little is known about the natural life cycle of the milkfish. The adult is seldom seen in the wild. The fry appear on the rainy side of the islands. They come in vast schools to sandy, shallow coasts and enter estuaries and tidal creeks. Milkfish fry are 12 to 15 millimeters long and almost transparent except for their eyes. The fry that escape the villagers' nets disappear. Some survivors will return in 6 to 7 years as adults, ready to spawn. The rest of the milkfish story remains a mystery. However, Filipinos have long known how to raise the fry in ponds. Portuguese explorer Ferdinand Magellan noted the pond culture of milkfish on his voyage to the Philippines in 1521. The fry, taken from salt water, easily adapt to brackish water ponds in tidal flats. About 6 months later, the pond-raised fish, called bangus in the Philippines, are ready for harvest. This tasty fish, with its milky white sides and belly, is popular among fish farmers in Asia because it is so easy to raise. Milkfish can live in a wide range of water temperature and salinity. Once established, milkfish feed on natural foods such as algae, which are practically free to the farmer. In Asia, more than 250,000 metric tons of the fish are harvested each year. The milkfish has been sighted in many different waters. Its scientific history began in the Red Sea, where it was first noted by a Scandinavian scientist in 1775 and given the Latin name Chanos chanos. Today it is still present in these waters and is found along the coast of East Africa. It has also been reported in large areas of the Indian and Pacific Oceans, from southern Japan to New Zealand, and as far east as the Gulf of California and the coast of Mexico. However, milkfish is most abundant in Southeast Asian waters, where there are now close to 500,000 hectares of milkfish ponds and pens. Here, the fish has created a multi-million-dollar industry, concentrated in Taiwan, Indonesia, and the Philippines. In the Philippines alone, there are close to 200,000 hectares under cultivation. This milkfish industry employs at least 1 million Filipinos, from fry collectors and fish farmers to dealers and restaurant workers. Filipinos are very fond of the market-sized milkfish, the bangus. They will rise before dawn to bargain for the freshest fish at the right price. In total, the milkfish represents about 15% of the protein consumed by the growing population of the Philippines. In spite of the popularity of the fish and the commercial success of the milkfish industry in the Philippines, its full potential is not being realized. Compared with that in some other Asian countries, production in the Philippines is limited and yields are low. Fish farmers in the Philippines often have problems with the most important element of any aquaculture industry, a reliable supply of seed or fry. Fry supply is seasonal and irregular, so farmers often have to pay a high price or bring their supply from hundreds of kilometers away. The fry concessionaires have problems too. The concessionaires have to pay for an annual license to allow them to buy and sell fry from a limited stretch of shoreline. As the fry are only abundant for 2 or 3 months, and the concessionaires have no guarantee of licenses the following year, they may encourage overfishing, thus jeopardizing future supplies. And the fry supply can be cut off by storms or coastal pollution. In the traditional method of sorting fry, other valuable species are often thrown away. In spite of their tiny size, the milkfish fry are quite hardy. They can survive without food in these basins for 6 or 7 days. However, once transferred to ponds, their survival rate is often a different story. Until they reach the fingerling stage, they are a high-risk investment for fish farmers. In the Philippines today, 1 1/3 billion fry are collected each year, but fewer than half survive beyond the fingerling stage. Without better rearing methods and a more reliable fry supply, the full potential of the milkfish industry in the Philippines will never be realized. In 1973, SEAFDEC, the Southeast Asian Fisheries Development Center, created its aquaculture department to help solve such problems. A research station was established in the heart of milkfish country, near Iloilo, in Panay Island. Canada's International Development Research Centre has supported SEAFDEC's research on milkfish since 1975. Early in the research, SEAFDEC tackled the problem of a reliable fry supply. The researchers began to raise milkfish in tanks and ponds from fry captured in the wild to see if they could get them to spawn in captivity. But it is estimated that the milkfish take 6 to 7 years to reach sexual maturity, so the researchers looked to the sea for wild spawners. Adult milkfish are sometimes caught in fishermen's traps when the moon is full or new. At this time, they are ready to spawn. Normally, the fishermen are required by law to set these milkfish free. However, the researchers were allowed to contract with fishermen to keep some of them for experimental purposes. No one had ever succeeded in getting the milkfish to spawn in captivity. The researchers knew that, as with all fishes, the biological trigger to the spawning behavior of the milkfish lay in the hormone gonadotropin, a secretion of the pituitary gland. But the supply of adult milkfish was limited. The Filipino-Canadian team, who were trying to spawn the wild milkfish, used a hormone solution that included dried salmon pituitary powder from the British Columbia Research Council in Canada. After 2 years, they succeeded. On the 14th of April 1977, a captured female milkfish was injected with this hormone. The following day, it began to spawn and was stripped of its eggs. The eggs were fertilized, and in about 36 hours, larvae began to hatch. For the first time ever, scientists had successfully induced the milkfish to breed in captivity. But breeding experiments were only part of CIFDEC's program. Researchers were also attempting to trace the milkfish in the wild. They inserted electronic tags through the mouth and released the fish. The researchers found that electronic tracking was difficult in waters filled with coral reefs. They did learn, however, that the fish generally migrate parallel to the coastline. Many more studies were carried out to learn more about the natural life cycle of the milkfish. The research team tried to trace the fry caught near shore back to their original spawning sites. Milkfish eggs have always been difficult to find. They were first scientifically identified in the Java Sea in the 1920s, but only 15 were found at that time. The CIFDEC team had more success. They managed to collect 1,700 milkfish eggs during a 5-year search. This brought the researchers closer to the elusive spawning grounds. Reports of spawning milkfish jumping wildly out of shallow water near certain islands brought the researchers even nearer to their goal. But not near enough. The full story of the milkfish remains well hidden in these waters. The research team made steady progress in the breeding studies, with wild milkfish captured in fishermen's traps. The fish is easily excited, and stress in handling can be fatal. The team devised transportation methods which reduced mortality rates due to stress. To transport the milkfish safely to the research station, from distances as great as 20 kilometers, the fish were confined to a slowly moving cage in the water. Since the supply of spawning milkfish was seasonal and very uncertain, each specimen was handled with great care. A special method was worked out for transportation out of water. The researchers steadily refined the technique of induced spawning and began to standardize their methods. Once the female milkfish had been identified, they had to be checked for readiness to spawn. This completed, they were gently released into the tank to recuperate. A few hours later, the female fish received their first injection of the hormone solution. A second injection followed 12 hours later. About 12 hours after the last injection, the females began to spawn and were stripped of their eggs. The milkfish is a tremendously fertile fish. Some large females contain as many as 7 million eggs. In case live males were not available at the same time, the researchers took sperm from dissected fish whenever available. This would be preserved by freezing until eggs were available for fertilization. The research assistants learned the best methods of gently mixing eggs and sperm together. They learned the best conditions for incubation. The refinement of these techniques of induced spawning was important. However, the researchers knew that breeding experiments would not solve the problem of fry survival. They studied the diseases of fry and the effects of different salt concentrations, feeds, and feeding rates. They verified that milkfish fry thrive on minute zooplankton such as brine shrimp and rotifers, their favorite food. This zooplankton feeds on phytoplankton, such as chlorella. Studies were carried out on different fertilization rates and conditions for raising this minute plant material. This work would help in establishing an economically effective feeding system for future milkfish hatcheries. Meanwhile, the program for raising broodstock from wild fry continued. When the fish were large enough, they were transferred to floating cages in a sheltered area of the sea. It was hoped that this more natural environment would enable them to attain sexual maturity in captivity. These cages, locally made, were an improvement on the fish pens used earlier. The nets inside the cages could be easily raised to retrieve the fish. In these cages, the milkfish became quite domesticated and began to expect food at certain times of day. Slow feeding allowed the fish to consume most of the pellets dropped into their nets. A balanced diet with a high protein content was found to be important for maturation. As the broodstock grew older, the team monitored their development. A record was kept of their growth and weight, and blood samples were taken to determine the presence and level of natural hormones that would indicate maturation. Slow-dissolving hormone pellets were inserted in some fish to test whether this would speed up gonadal maturation and induce spawning. Results were largely negative, probably because of stress from handling. However, some cages of the milkfish were left undisturbed in hope that the fish might spawn naturally. Plankton nets were placed on the downcurrent side of these cages to collect any eggs. In August 1980, eggs were noticed on the surface, and the plankton nets were raised. For the first time in the history of the milkfish, they had spawned naturally in captivity. Equally exciting for the researchers was the fact that they had spawned at about 4 years of age, instead of at 6 or 7 years, the estimated time needed to reach sexual maturity in the wild. It is hoped that Seafdeck's breeding achievements will soon lead to the establishment of milkfish hatcheries, where a combination of floating cages offshore and concrete hatchery tanks onshore will be used to rear milkfish broodstock. In such tanks, eggs can be collected much more easily than at sea. However, because natural spawning is seasonal, hormonal inducement may still play a role in ensuring a year-round supply of fry. Such future developments must be guided by more ecological research. More information is needed on natural spawning grounds and on the movements of fry. This work will help researchers determine where future milkfish hatcheries should be built, in locations that complement rather than conflict with the long-established natural fry fishery and distribution system, from which about 200,000 Filipinos receive at least part of their annual income. The final choice of hatchery locations will be recommended by the Philippines National Milkfish Breeding Program, which is now establishing research sites throughout the country and is planning to help increase the collection from natural fry grounds. However, more than just an improved fry supply is needed to increase milkfish production in the Philippines. Opening up new areas for cultivation is not the best answer either, because fish ponds are normally constructed in tidal mangrove swamps, and such areas are the breeding grounds for many species of marine life. If much more mangrove is destroyed, it could do extensive damage to other sectors of the Philippines' fishing industry. These concerns have resulted in CFDEC launching a second stage of milkfish research to seek ways to intensify rather than expand the milkfish industry, to increase the yield of fish per hectare. Various pond designs are being experimented with. Ponds with two-level bottoms, for instance. The upper level is ideal for growing algae, while the fish can retreat to the deeper, cooler water in hot weather. CFDEC is trying to improve pond water controls. Prefabricated gates of reinforced concrete are being tested. The designs incorporate screens to keep out predators. The researchers are also learning more about the treatment of milkfish ponds between harvest and stocking times. Draining and drying to eliminate those predators that do get in. Adding lime to correct soil acidity. Deciding which fertilizer to use to stimulate the growth of lab, a rich complex of algae and minute animal life which the young milkfish thrive on. More research is being carried out on new culture systems, such as the rearing of milkfish with shrimp and an integrated production system for chicken and fish, in which the chickens fertilize the fish ponds while producing eggs. But the results of this research on fish pond engineering and management cannot be utilized unless there is an improvement in fry survival rates. Such improvement depends on the proper transportation of fry in oxygenated water in containers protected from sunlight. And fry must be introduced into nursery ponds very carefully to avoid shock because of sudden temperature change. With these handling methods, a good supply of food, and proper control of temperature and salinity in nursery ponds, many more milkfish fry will survive to the fingerling stage, when they are ready to be transferred to larger ponds. The young milkfish will also prosper in freshwater. CFDEC's research on breeding and fry survival has been extended to Laguna de Bay, a 90,000-hectare freshwater lake near Manila. Here, during the past 10 years, over 15,000 hectares of fish pens have been constructed, one of the most impressive developments in the recent history of aquaculture. The milkfish feed directly on rich phytoplankton in this water. They can grow from fingerling to market size in 5 or 6 months. In total, these fish pen operators provide at least 20,000 metric tons of fish annually, about 20% of the country's total aquaculture production. CFDEC's work on the breeding and rearing of milkfish still has some way to go before Filipino fish farmers can take full advantage of it. But the research results have the potential to increase the yield from small farmers' ponds many times over, and the harvest from large-scale operations could double. More than half of the population of the Philippines receives less than the United Nations recommended daily allowance of protein. Yet bangus, the market-size milkfish, is one food which many Filipinos can still afford. So the research on milkfish is a valuable attempt to help solve this protein deficiency. It is an attempt to increase production to meet a growing demand. And the demand is very much in evidence. In the provincial capitals and in Manila, restaurants specialize in traditional bangus dishes. Milkfish is popular everywhere. At this stage in the research, much remains to be uncovered about the mysterious milkfish in the wild. But the positive results from milkfish breeding and culture in the Philippines will surely benefit more than the coastal people and fish farmers of that nation. The results may someday be transferred to the vast, unutilized coastal waters of other parts of Southeast Asia, increasing many times over the area under cultivation.